I never expected to find secrets about my family while cleaning out Grandma Rose's attic. But life has a way of dropping bombshells when you least expect them. My name is Mallory, Mally to anyone who knows me, and until yesterday, I thought I knew everything about my family's history. Turns out, I didn't know the half of it. The letter fell out of an old cookbook, yellowed and creased from years of being hidden between recipes for pot roast and apple pie. At first, I almost tossed it in the donation pile with everything else. But something about the way it was folded, tucked so carefully into that specific page, made me pause. Dear Rose, it began in unfamiliar handwriting. I know what you did. The truth about the Thompson estate and the missing inheritance will come out eventually. Your granddaughter deserves to know what really happened that summer. My hands started shaking. I had to sit down on one of the dusty boxes, sending up a cloud that made me sneeze. The letter wasn't signed, but it was dated just 3 months before Grandma Rose passed away. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who might have answers. Uncle Greg? It's Mally. I need to talk to you about Grandma Rose. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we'd lost connection. Finally, his voice came through, tight with tension. What did you find? A letter. Something about the Thompson estate, Anne. Don't say another word over the phone, he cut me off. Meet me at Carson's diner in an hour. Anne Mally? Don't tell anyone else about this. The drive to Carson's felt like it took forever. I kept glancing at the letter on my passenger seat, half expecting it to disappear like some kind of hallucination. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived, just a couple of truckers at the counter and Uncle Greg in a back booth. Looking like he'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen him at Christmas. Show me, he said before I could even sit down. I handed him the letter, watching his face as he read it. His jaw clenched, and he closed his eyes for a moment. I was hoping this would stay buried. What would stay buried? Uncle Greg, what's going on? He folded the letter carefully, then pushed it back across the table. There are people in this town who aren't what they seem, Mally. Your grandmother knew that better than anyone. She had her reasons for keeping certain things quiet. That's not an answer, I said, frustration building. Why are you being so cryptic? Because some truths are dangerous, he replied, leaning forward. Especially when they involve people like Vivian Lawson. The name hit me like a bucket of cold water. Vivian Lawson, the sweet older lady who ran the local garden club and always brought casseroles to funeral homes. What could she possibly have to do with any of this? Listen carefully, Uncle Greg continued, his voice barely above a whisper. That house you're living in? Your grandmother's house? There's more to it than you know. Much more. But before I tell you everything, you need to be absolutely sure you want to know. Because once you do, there's no going back. I thought about the letter, about Grandma Rose's final months. About all the times I'd caught her staring out the window with that worried look on her face. I need to know. He nodded slowly. Then start by being careful who you trust. Especially if you meet anyone new in town. And whatever you do, don't let Vivian Lawson know you found that letter. As if on cue, the diner's bell chimed. We both looked up to see Vivian herself walking in, her signature pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She smiled and waved, heading our way. Uncle Greg stood up quickly. Remember what I said, he muttered, then louder, good to see you, kiddo. Think about that insurance policy we discussed. He was gone before Vivian reached our table, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and a woman who, according to my uncle, was somehow at the center of a mystery I didn't yet understand. After my unsettling conversation with Uncle Greg, I needed a distraction. That's how I ended up agreeing to meet Jake Lawson for coffee, despite my better judgment. We'd been messaging through a dating app for a week, and his photos didn't do him justice, tall, with kind eyes and the sort of smile that made you want to trust him immediately. So you're living in your grandmother's old place, he asked, stirring his coffee. The Victorian on Maple? I nodded, trying not to think about the letter hidden in my purse. Been there about 6 months now. Still finding surprises in every corner. My mother talks about that house sometimes, Jake said. Says it's one of the prettiest in town. She's actually good friends with most of the garden club ladies. My stomach dropped. Your mother wouldn't happen to be Vivian Lawson, would she? His face lit up. You know her? Mom's amazing, she practically runs this town's social circle. We should all have dinner together sometime. Before I could formulate a response, the cafe door chimed. As if summoned by our conversation, Vivian Lawson herself walked in, wearing her signature pearls and a perfectly coordinated outfit. Jake, sweetheart, she called out, making her way to our table. What a wonderful surprise. Jake stood to hug her, and I noticed how his whole demeanor shifted, less confident, more eager to please. Mom, this is Mallory Thompson. Mally, my mother. Vivian's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she looked at me. Thompson? Rose's granddaughter? That's right, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. We met briefly at the diner yesterday. Oh yes, with Gregory. She pulled up a chair without asking. How is your uncle these days? We haven't spoken in years, not since that unfortunate business with the property lines. Jake looked confused. What property lines? Ancient history, Vivian waved her hand dismissively. Though speaking of property, Mally, have you considered selling that big old house? It must be so much work for a single woman. I'm not interested in selling, I said firmly. Mother, Jake warned, but Vivian continued. I only mention it because I know several buyers who'd love that location. The Historical Society's been eyeing it for years. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Between us, there are some structural issues you might not know about. Your grandmother was very private about such things. My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Was this what Uncle Greg meant about being careful? The house is fine, I said. I had it inspected before moving in. Of course, dear. Vivian patted my hand, her rings cold against my skin. I just worry. That house has such history, wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen. Jake cleared his throat. Mom, didn't you have that garden club meeting? Oh. She checked her watch. You're right. Mally, we simply must have you over for dinner soon. Jake's place has such a lovely view of your grandmother's house. After she left, Jake apologized. She can be a bit intense. She's just protective. Does she often show up when you're on dates? He laughed uncomfortably. Pure coincidence. Though she does have a knack for knowing where I am. I wanted to ask more, but my phone buzzed, a text from Uncle Greg, need to talk. Found something else. Come alone. Everything okay? Jake asked. I stood up, gathering my things. Family emergency. I should go. Let me drive you. No, I said too quickly. I mean, thanks, but I've got my car. As I headed for the door, Jake called out, Mally? Would you like to have dinner tomorrow? Just us? I hesitated. Despite everything, there was something about him that made me want to say yes. But Uncle Greg's warning echoed in my head, be careful who you trust. I'll text you, I said, and hurried out before I could change my mind. In my rearview mirror, I saw Vivian's car pull out of a side street and follow Jake's truck as he drove away. Something told me that pure coincidence had nothing to do with it. Uncle Greg was waiting for me at the old boathouse by the lake, a place we used to fish when I was little. He held a manila envelope and looked like he hadn't slept. You're dating Jake Lawson, he asked before I could even say hello. How did you? Small town. He handed me the envelope. These are property records from 30 years ago. Your grandmother's house was part of a larger estate. The Lawsons lived in the carriage house back then, as tenants. I pulled out the documents, squinting at the faded text. What changed? Vivian happened. Greg leaned against the weathered railing. She married into money, then her husband died under questionable circumstances. Insurance paid out big. Next thing we knew, she was trying to claim part of the Thompson estate through some fabricated deed. My hands trembled as I read. Grandma Rose stopped her? Barely. But Vivian never forgot. He took a deep breath. That's why she's circling again. She wants what she thinks was stolen from her. The house. Power. Control. She's obsessed with social status, with owning pieces of old money families. He looked at me directly. Jake's her fourth husband's son. She adopted him, molded him. Every girlfriend who's gotten too close has mysteriously disappeared from town. My phone buzzed, a text from Jake, missing you already. Dinner tomorrow? He seems different, I said, but even I could hear the doubt in my voice. They all seem different at first. Greg pulled another paper from his pocket. This was in Rose's safety deposit box. I picked it up this morning. It was a photograph, younger versions of Grandma Rose and Vivian standing in front of my house. They were smiling, arms linked like best friends. On the back was written, "Remember who she really is." There's more, Greg said. But we need to be careful. Vivian has friends everywhere, police, city hall, real estate. One wrong move and a twig snapped behind us. We both turned to see Vivian herself stepping out from behind a tree, her pearls gleaming in the afternoon sun. Gregory Thompson, she said sweetly. Still spreading lies about me after all these years? Greg stepped in front of me. This doesn't concern you, Vivian. Everything in this town concerns me. Her smile hardened. Especially when it involves my son. Jake's not really your son, is he? The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Something dark flashed across her face. Biology is irrelevant. I raised him. I made him who he is. She took a step closer. Did Gregory tell you about his own role in all this? About how he tried to steal the estate from Rose? That's not true, Greg snapped, but I noticed his hands shaking. No? Vivian pulled out her phone. Should we call the police chief and discuss the missing documents from 1992? The ones with your signature? Greg's face went pale. You see, Mallory dear, everyone has secrets. Vivian's voice dripped with false sympathy. The question is, what are you going to do with yours? My phone buzzed again. Jake, Mom says you're at the lake with your uncle. Everything okay? You're having him follow me? I asked, anger rising. Jake worries about the people he cares about. Vivian adjusted her pearls. He's had his heart broken before, by women who didn't understand family loyalty. Is that what happened to them? They didn't understand family loyalty? Careful, dear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That house has such old wiring. Accidents happen all the time in historical properties. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, calling over her shoulder, "See you at dinner tomorrow." I looked at Greg, who seemed to have aged another decade in the past few minutes. What really happened in 1992? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Some mistakes can't be undone, Mally. Just be careful. Vivian doesn't make idle threats. As I drove home, I noticed a familiar car in my rearview mirror, Jake's truck, following at a discreet distance. The same way his mother had followed him earlier. The house looked different when I pulled up, darker somehow. I thought about the old wiring Vivian had mentioned, and wondered what other secrets these walls held. My phone buzzed one last time. Jake, can't wait to see you tomorrow. Don't worry about Mom, she's just protective. I stared at the message, thinking about all the other protective mothers who had driven their sons to dangerous extremes. The question was, which side of that history was I living in? The dinner with Jake started normally enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We were at La Maison, the fanciest restaurant in town, and somehow we'd ended up at a table with a clear view of Vivian's usual spot by the window. She wasn't there tonight, but her presence lingered like a shadow. You seem distracted, Jake said, reaching across the table for my hand. Is everything okay? I pulled back slightly, pretending to adjust my napkin. Just thinking about something your mother said at the lake yesterday. His expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Mom mentioned she ran into you. Said you seemed upset about something. Did she mention threatening me? Threatening? He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mom doesn't threaten people, Mally. She's protective, sure, but... She followed you from the coffee shop the other day, I said. And you followed me to the lake. The waiter arrived with our wine, giving Jake time to compose himself. When we were alone again, he leaned forward. Look, after what happened with Sarah. Sarah? He took a long sip of wine. My ex. She left town suddenly. Mom was worried you might do the same. So you're spying on me? It's not like that. His voice dropped. Mom's been through a lot. After my father died. Which one? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Jake's face went blank. What do you mean? Nothing. I just heard. What exactly did your uncle tell you? There was an edge to his voice I hadn't heard before. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your email. Gee. Excuse me, I said, standing. I need to use the restroom. In the relative privacy of the bathroom stall, I opened my email. There was a single message from Greg with an attachment, a scanned newspaper article from 1992. The headline read, Local woman questions husband's death after insurance claim denied. The photo showed a younger Vivian, wearing those same pearls, standing next to a man who looked remarkably like Jake. The caption named him as Thomas Lawson, her third husband. Another text came through, she married his father 6 months later. Jake was 4. My hands were shaking as I returned to the table. Jake was on his phone, frowning. Everything okay? I asked. Mom's not feeling well, he said. She wants me to come over. Now? In the middle of dinner? He was already signaling for the check. She's alone in that big house. After what happened to Sarah? What did happen to Sarah, Jake? He froze. What? You keep mentioning her, but you never finish the story. It's complicated. He wouldn't meet my eyes. She made accusations about Mom, tried to turn me against her. Then one day, she just left. Like Thomas Lawson just left? The check holder slammed down on the table harder than necessary. I should take you home. I drove myself, remember? Right. He stood awkwardly. Look, Mom's probably just being dramatic, but I should check on her. Rain check? I watched him hurry out, already dialing his phone. Through the window, I saw him get into his truck and Vivian's car pull out from a side street to follow him. My phone buzzed one final time. Another text from Greg, don't go home. Meet me at the motel on Highway 9. Room 115. Bring the letters. I headed for my car, trying to look casual while scanning the parking lot for familiar vehicles. As I reached for my door handle, I noticed something that made my blood run cold, a small pearl, identical to the ones in Vivian's necklace. Sitting on my driver's seat. The doors were still locked. Someone had a key to my car. I backed away, fumbling for my phone. But before I could call Greg, another message came through, this one from Jake. Mom wants to know if you'd like to come over for tea tomorrow. She has some old photos of your grandmother she'd love to show you. I stared at the pearl gleaming on my seat, remembering what Uncle Greg had said about Vivian's other daughters-in-law. And wondered how many of them had received similar invitations. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes and desperation. Uncle Greg spread photos across the bed, snapshots of Vivian through the years, always wearing those pearls, always standing next to different men. And in every photo, that same calculated smile. For husbands, Greg said, pointing to each picture. All died under mysterious circumstances. Insurance paid out on 3 of them, And Jake's real father? Thomas Lawson. The only one whose death was ruled suspicious. Greg handed me a police report. Case went cold when the detective handling it suddenly retired. Moved to Florida on a surprisingly generous pension. A knock at the door made us both jump. Greg pulled a gun from his jacket, where had that come from? And motioned me behind him. Gregory? Vivian's voice sang through the door. I know you're in there. Let's talk about old times. Greg's hand shook as he aimed at the door. Leave, Vivian. With my son's girlfriend? How rude. Keys jingled. The manager was very understanding when I explained my concerns about my mentally unstable brother-in-law. The door swung open. Vivian stood there, perfect as always, Jake hovering behind her like a shadow. Mally? His voice cracked. What's going on? Put the gun down, Gregory, Vivian said softly. Before someone gets hurt. Again. Greg's arm lowered slowly. Tell her, Vivian. Tell her what really happened in 1992. Mom? Jake stepped forward. What's he talking about? Your uncle is unwell, Vivian said, not taking her eyes off Greg. He's been spreading lies about me for years. Isn't that right, Gregory? Ever since Rose rejected you? That's not. Tell them about the forged documents, Vivian continued. How you tried to steal Rose's estate. How she caught you and chose to protect me instead of her own brother. Greg's face went ash white. You're twisting everything. Am I? Vivian pulled out her phone. Should I play the recording from that night? The one where you threatened to kill Thomas if he exposed your scheme? That's impossible, Greg whispered. You couldn't have. I keep everything, Gregory. Every secret. Every lie. She turned to me. Your grandmother knew that. It's why she trusted me with the truth about the Thompson estate. Jake moved closer to his mother, his expression hardening. You should leave, both of you. Before I call the police. Jake, please, I started, but Vivian cut me off. Oh, dear. You actually care for him, don't you? She touched her pearls. Sarah did too. Such a shame about her accident. What accident? Jake asked sharply. The one that hasn't happened yet, Vivian replied, smiling at me. Unless Mallory makes better choices than Sarah did. Greg raised the gun again. That's enough. Mom? Jake's voice shook. What are you saying? Nothing, sweetheart. Just protecting what's ours. She stepped toward me. The house belongs with family. Real family. You understand that, don't you, Mallory? I backed away, bumping into the bedside table. Something fell, a folder full of documents. As papers scattered across the floor, I saw something that made my heart stop, a photograph of my grandmother and Vivian. Standing in front of my house. But this one was different from the earlier version. In this one, they weren't smiling. And Thomas Lawson was in the background, looking terrified. Where did you get that? Vivian's mask slipped for just a moment. Rose kept copies too, Greg said quietly. Of everything. The tension in the room shifted. Jake picked up the photo, his hands trembling. Dad? Give me that, Vivian snapped, reaching for the picture. But Jake pulled back, really looking at it for the first time. What did you do? Only what was necessary, Vivian said, her voice turning cold. Everything I've done has been for you. Like Sarah's accident? I asked, finding my voice. Was that necessary too? Jake's head snapped up. What accident? Mom, what are they talking about? Vivian's hand moved to her purse. Sometimes, darling, we have to make hard choices to protect our family. I saw the glint of metal in her bag and realized with horror that Greg wasn't the only one who'd brought a gun to this conversation. The question was, who would make the first hard choice? Everything happened too fast. The glint of metal in Vivian's purse, Greg shouting a warning, Jake lunging forward, and then the deafening crack of a gunshot. The motel room exploded into chaos. I dove behind the bed as Greg and Vivian struggled for the gun. Jake stood frozen, the photograph of his father still clutched in his trembling hands. "Jake, help me!" Vivian screamed. "He's trying to kill me, just like he killed your father." Another shot, this time hitting the mirror above my head, sending glass raining down. Through the shards, I saw Greg stumble backward, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Mom, stop!" Jake's voice cracked. "Please." But Vivian wasn't listening. She aimed the gun at Greg again, her perfect facade crumbling. "You should have stayed away, Gregory. Let sleeping dogs lie." "Tell him," Greg gasped. "Tell Jake what really happened that night." "I protected my family," Vivian snarled. "Thomas was weak. He would have ruined everything." Jake took a step back. "What are you saying?" "Your father was going to leave us," Vivian's voice softened. "Take everything we had. I couldn't let that happen. Not again." I inched toward the door, but my foot crunched on broken glass. Vivian's head snapped toward me. "Don't move, dear." She smiled that perfect smile. "We're not finished yet." "The police are coming," I bluffed. "Someone must have heard the shots." "They won't find anything suspicious," Vivian said. "Just a tragic accident. A disturbed man attacking his niece. A concerned mother protecting her son." "Like Sarah's accident?" Jake asked quietly. Something shifted in Vivian's eyes. "Sarah was going to take you away from me. They all try eventually." "What did you do to her?" "The same thing I'll have to do to Mallory." Vivian's hand steadied on the gun. "Unless she makes the right choice." "Which is?" "Sign over the house. Leave town. Never contact Jake again." I thought about my grandmother's letter, about all the women who'd disappeared from Jake's life. About Sarah, who'd probably faced this same choice. And if I refuse? Then there'll be another tragic accident. Vivian's finger tightened on the trigger. So many old houses have faulty wiring these days. "Mom, please," Jake stepped between us. "This has to stop. Everything I've done has been for you," Vivian's voice cracked. "To protect what's ours. By killing my father? He was going to destroy us." The gun wavered. "Just like she will. They all do, eventually." Greg tried to stand but slumped against the wall. "Rose knew, didn't she? That's why she left the evidence." "Rose understood family loyalty," Vivian spat. "Until she didn't." Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time. "We're leaving," Vivian grabbed Jake's arm. "Now." "No." Jake pulled away. "Don't do this," Vivian's mask slipped completely. "Don't choose her over me. I'm your mother." "Are you?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "How many others have there been? How many accidents?" The sirens grew closer. Vivian's hand shook, the gun swinging between all of us. "Last chance, Mallory," she said. "The house or your life? Choose carefully." I looked at Jake, seeing the lost little boy beneath the man. At Greg, bleeding but still trying to protect me. At Vivian, whose perfect world was crumbling around her. "I choose the truth," I said. Vivian's finger squeezed the trigger just as Jake lunged for the gun. The shot went wide, hitting the wall beside me. We all scrambled for cover as she fired again and again, her screams mixing with the approaching sirens. The last thing I saw before everything went black was one of Vivian's perfect pearls rolling across the floor, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. When I came to, I wasn't sure if I was alive or dead. But the pain in my shoulder suggested I'd survived, barely. The question was, had anyone else? The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. My shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed me, but I couldn't rest. Not with Uncle Greg in surgery and Vivian still out there somewhere. Jake sat in the corner, staring at his hands. He hadn't said a word since the police had questioned us. The photograph of his father was crumpled in his pocket, stained with blood, his mother's or Greg's, I wasn't sure. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Miss Thompson? There's a package for you at the desk. From Rose Thompson's estate attorney." The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands. Inside was a single key and a letter, dated the day before my grandmother died. "My dearest Mally," I read aloud, my voice shaking. "If you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth about Vivian. The key opens the safe in my study, the one behind the portrait. What you find there will explain everything. But be careful. She'll come for it." Jake's head snapped up. "The house. That's where she'll go." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a security alert. Someone had disabled the alarm system at my grandmother's house. "We should call the police," I said, but Jake was already standing. "She won't talk to them. But she might talk to me." The drive to my house was tense. Jake's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "I should have seen it," he whispered. "All those years, all those accidents. She fooled everyone. Not your grandmother." He pulled up to the curb, killing the headlights. "That's why she had to die, wasn't it?" My blood ran cold. "What?" "Mom brought her tea every Sunday. Said it was tradition." His voice cracked. "Rose started getting sick after that. Light spilled from my grandmother's study window. We crept around back, using the key to enter through the kitchen." "Jake?" Vivian's voice floated down the stairs. "I knew you'd come, sweetheart." Jake squeezed my hand once, then stepped into view. "It's over, Mom." "Nothing's over. Something crashed upstairs. Help me find the safe. Everything we deserve is in there." We climbed the stairs slowly. Vivian had torn the study apart, books scattered everywhere. The portrait of my grandmother lay face down on the floor. "There's nothing here for you," I said. Vivian spun around. Her perfect appearance was gone, hair wild, makeup smeared, pearls missing from her broken necklace. But her eyes were sharp as ever. "The prodigal daughter returns." She held up a familiar-looking letter. Rose left quite a paper trail. Insurance policies, property deeds, evidence of all sorts of interesting things. "Like what you did to Thomas?" Jake asked. "To Sarah?" "I protected us," Vivian snarled. "Just like Rose protected Gregory after he forged those documents. Family protects family. Is that what you told yourself when you poisoned my grandmother?" Vivian's smile turned cruel. "She should have given me what I wanted. The house, the estate, everything she promised when I helped her hide Gregory's crimes." "She never promised you anything," a voice said from the doorway. Uncle Greg stood there, pale but alive, his arm in a sling. "Rose kept evidence against me to protect the estate from you." "Liar." Vivian lunged for the safe behind the fallen portrait. "It's all in here. Proof that this house belongs to me." The safe clicked open. Inside was a single envelope and a string of pearls, identical to the ones Vivian always wore. "Those were evidence," Greg said quietly. "From Thomas's murder investigation. Rose kept them all these years, waiting for the right moment." Vivian reached for the pearls, but Jake got there first. "Dad was wearing these the night he died, wasn't he?" "Jake, please. Tell me the truth. For once." Vivian's facade cracked completely. "He was going to take you away from me. They all tried to take everything from me." She pulled another gun from her jacket, smaller than before, but just as deadly. "Now you're all going to listen carefully. This house, the estate, everything, it's mine. It's always been mine." But as she raised the gun, something caught her eye. In the envelope from the safe was a single photograph, Vivian herself, standing over Thomas's body. her precious pearls broken and scattered around him like tears. Rose wasn't protecting Gregory, I realized. She was protecting everyone from you. The gun wavered as sirens wailed in the distance. Jake stepped forward, the photograph of his father held out like a shield. "It's over, Mom," he said softly. "I choose the truth." 6 months after Vivian's arrest, I stood in my grandmother's study, finally ready to pack away the last of the evidence. The trial had been quick, the photograph of Thomas's murder, combined with Greg's testimony and the exhumation of my grandmother's body showing traces of poison, left little room for doubt. Jake helped me sort through the boxes, both of us quiet with the weight of what we'd learned. Sarah had been found alive, hidden away in a mental health facility under a false name, committed there by Vivian after she discovered too much. She was recovering now, helping the police piece together other mysterious deaths connected to Vivian's past. "Found something else," Jake said, holding up a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in my grandmother's handwriting, dated just days before her death. Inside was a deed to the house and a letter I'd never seen before. "Dearest Mally. By now you know the truth about Vivian, about the choices we all made. I kept evidence of her crimes not for revenge, but as protection for those who would come after me. Including you. The house is yours, as is the trust fund I've set aside. But the real inheritance is the truth you've fought to uncover. Sometimes protection means making hard choices. Sometimes it means letting go of those we love to save them from themselves. I couldn't save Vivian from what she became. But I could save you from her fate. Love always. Grandma Rose." Jake touched my shoulder gently. "You okay?" I nodded, thinking about all the women who'd stood in this room before me, my grandmother, Sarah, even Vivian herself. Each making choices that echoed through time. "I visited Mom yesterday," Jake said quietly. "She asked about the pearls." The evidence pearls sat in their box on my desk, a reminder of everything that had happened. "What did you tell her?" "That they're where they belong. With the truth." We worked in silence for a while, until Greg appeared in the doorway, his arm finally out of its sling. "Found something you should see." He led us to the garden, where workers were removing the old fountain, the one Vivian had always admired. Underneath was a small cache of letters, preserved in waterproof containers. "More evidence?" I asked. Greg shook his head. "Love letters. Between Vivian and Thomas. Before everything." Jake picked one up with trembling hands. "She really loved him?" "Maybe that's why she couldn't let him go," I said. "Why she can't let anyone go." The last box contained a single pearl necklace, identical to the one Vivian always wore. A note attached read, "For when you're ready to understand, Rose." "She knew," Greg said softly. "Rose knew Vivian would self-destruct eventually. She was trying to save her, right until the end." Jake stared at the necklace. "All this time, Mom thought she was protecting me. But she was really afraid of losing control. Of being alone." I touched his hand gently. "We don't have to be our parents' mistakes." Later that night, as Jake and I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I thought about protection, about love. About the fine line between saving someone and destroying them. The house felt different now, not haunted by secrets, but filled with hard-won truth. "What happens now?" Jake asked. I looked at the garden where the fountain had stood, thinking about planting something new there. Something that could grow without shadows. "We make different choices," I said. My phone buzzed, a message from the prison. Vivian wanted to see me. Just me. Jake noticed my expression. "You don't have to go." "I know." I squeezed his hand. "But maybe understanding is its own kind of protection." The pearl necklace sat in my drawer upstairs, waiting. Not as evidence, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting the truth come to light. No matter how much it hurts. Tomorrow, I would visit Vivian. Not for revenge, not for closure, but because sometimes protection means facing the darkness to find your way back to light. But tonight, in this moment, I was exactly where I needed to be, in my grandmother's house, with Jake beside me. Writing our own story one truth at a time.